Hello, Buckeye fans, and welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I'm Patrick Murphy. We're going to talk Buckeyes. We're going to talk Hawkeyes. We're going to talk all of the eyes on this week's show. And I was planning to go and pick up a beer, a fall beer for this event. We're getting into the fall season, starting to feel like football weather outside. But then on our front row message board, downtown said, "Why don't you have yourself a cold Busch Light for this show? Drink a real beer." Well, I happened to have Busch Light, and I didn't have to go anywhere. So that's what we're drinking for this week's happy hour. Nice cold Busch Light. But we're not going to just talk beer. We're going to talk Buckeyes. We're going to talk this upcoming game against Iowa. And to do so, bringing in our friend, David Eickholt. David, how you doing?
What's up, buddy? I was about to apologize for not having a craft beer. So the fact that you have I got a nice little Michelob here. I feel a lot better now that you don't have some fancy, double hazy IPA.
No, it's not. It is a Friday as we do this, but I still have a little work to do after this. Might actually try and get a workout in before the evening. So taking it easy. The Busch Light recommendation was a good one. But let's get into this week's game. I want to start where we don't normally talk about Iowa, and I'm sure you've talked about it quite a bit. But for Ohio State fans, new offensive coordinator. Obviously, Caleb Johnson is the feature of this Iowa offense. But what is different under Tim Lester than the last few years where Iowa's offense has obviously had some struggles?
Yeah, I think we can go a variety of different ways. Pre-snap motion, I think is where it starts. It was so mind-boggling last year and the year before that with Brian Ferentz, just because you knew what they were going to run every single time. Patrick, it got to a point where my sister does not watch football. She told me exactly what Iowa was going to run before the play was even snapped. And I'm like, I can't imagine what a high-level defensive coordinator or head coach is thinking at that point in time. So a lot of pre-snap motion. I think Iowa does a really good job of disguising a lot of different looks. Probably a stat that blows my mind the most around this offense is the fact that Caleb Johnson, when going up against stacked boxes, 8 or more, he's averaging nearly 11 yards a carry and is scoring on nearly 30% of those carries. He's been really unbelievable against stacked boxes. So I think Iowa does a really good job of utilizing the mid zone. I think they've kind of gotten away from, over the years with Iowa, it was like that zone gap kind of running scheme. They're not pushing guys horizontally anymore. They're pushing them more upfield. And, of course, when you have Caleb Johnson, who, for my money, is one of the top running backs in the country, I think Ashton Genty is really being talked about in a very well-deserving way. By the way, I don't know if you saw this, Patrick. His anytime touchdown against Utah State is minus 4,000.
That's insane.
I think for 3 or more, it's minus 140. 3 touchdowns. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. So yeah. I think the passing game's continuing to develop. I think they are right. I think they're closer than it appears, but I also question – I don't necessarily know what the ceiling is as far as the passing offense for this unit. I think they still lack some talent in the receiver room, but they have guys that I think will eventually be able to make some pretty big contributions as time goes along. But the other thing you need to remember, and Tim Lester brought this up last week when we spoke with him, Iowa, for the most part, when you think about their significant playmakers with this offense, they've really only had about 9 weeks to learn this system. In the spring, they were not, because Cade McNamara was out. Luke Lachey got maybe 1 full day of practice as he continued to recover from his injury last season. Reese Vanderzee, who had a standout opening game for Iowa, was at senior prom. And then, the offensive line, that's probably the only thing that's really helped was the offensive line to kind of learn this new system. So when you take all that into account, I think Iowa fans are trying to balance being patient versus understanding, this is the year. With the new look Big Ten, when you look at all the returning people they have to continue to take a step up. But I'm also of the belief that Iowa's probably only has about 40 to 50% of what they actually want to run. But I just don't think they have the personnel and the time to continue to install what Tim Lester's offense will eventually be.
CW 2024 said last week Natty Light and this week Busch Light.
Oh, it was actually Natty Light last week.
Well, all right. It was the last 2 weeks. And first of all, and it was because I'd had people over and somebody brought a case of Natty Light that they'd left at my house. and it was all I had because last week I was getting ready to go to Michigan State. But look, I didn't pick the Busch Light. Someone else picked it for me. I just happened to have crappy beer around in my house. So cheers to crappy college beer.
It's great. Natty Light. I was more of a Keystone Light guy in college. I've always thought Keystone Light clear, Natty Light, but apparently that's a hot take for a lot of people.
I think it depends where you go. Like the school you go to seems to have your heart in terms of crappy beers. Though most people grew out of it, I clearly have not. But I'm not picky. I'll drink nice beer too. Let's get back to the Hawkeyes. The offensive line, obviously, if you're going to have a Caleb Johnson, you need some guys to block for him. You obviously want that as well in the pass game as that kind of comes along. What can you tell us about that front five and what the Buckeyes defensive line front seven is going to face on Saturday afternoon?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is exactly – it was a make or break year for George Barnett because I think when you think about Iowa over the past 6-7 years, Patrick, you've seen a great linemen, like one or two guys that are just – these are dudes. These are guys who are going to play in the NFL, et cetera. But when's the last time Iowa's had a great offensive line? Like when you think about Iowa football, you think about what? Tight ends. You think about probably defensive backs at this point with Phil Parker. And you think about strong offensive line play as far as tradition goes under Kirk Ferentz. This is the year where I kind of feel like I don't think it's necessarily a great Iowa offensive line, but this is a very, very good Iowa offensive line that has taken significant steps forward. And they had to. I mean, this is a group that has 150 combined career starts between them. Mason Richmond, I think, is playing the best football of his career at left tackle. Logan Jones, I still think his ceiling is sky high. I just don't know if he's necessarily gotten to where I think a lot of people expect him to be. I still think he's a really good center. And then Connor Colby is going to be another NFL guy. I believe Connor Colby had an Ohio State offer when he was coming out of high school as well. So once he settled into a left guard, it's been a little bit interesting. And another tidbit, Patrick, when I looked at this, all 5 starters from the 2022 game are all still on the team, and they're all going to be starting against Ohio State. So I would say you saw the group before, but that was a very underdeveloped group. And speaking with George Barnett, I loved how he kept it real. He said, when I took over, there was a combination of, medical red shirts, guys medically retiring, transfers. The room was young. He said, with all due respect to the guys that played, there were probably only 2 linemen that were a Big Ten caliber at the time.
Okay.
So I think this is the year where they kind of feel like they have some depth. They have some potential all-conference caliber guys. But this is unquestionably going to be the biggest test that they'll face this entire season with this Ohio State defensive line. So I'm very intrigued about how many different things they try to throw in there. And if Iowa's going to stick to the script and try to run the ball. But I'm also of the belief that you kind of got to let everything fly because I don't think Iowa has anything to lose in this game.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's the same starting group. You just don't. I mean, in today's college football, especially, you don't see that happen very often for that number of years.
Same thing about Iowa's defense. I mean, how many 6-year guys they have? I mean, they're probably between experience and age, probably one of the oldest defenses to ever play college football.
Yeah, that makes sense. I forgot to mention off the top, if you have questions, if you're watching this live, you have questions for myself, I'll answer some questions later. But if you have questions for David on Iowa, feel free to throw those in the chat and we'll get those answered for you if they're out there. Well, since you mentioned it, the experienced defense, and I know we talked about this in the story I did with you that's already on Bucknuts, but this defense, I mean, this has been the calling card for Iowa, right? How do you rate this defense in comparison to other Iowa defenses under him, maybe in recent years?
This is so weird for me to say because I don't want to downplay how good this defense is because this is still a very good defense. It's not what I thought they would be this season because I think when you look at what they had last year versus now, I mean, 9 of the guys returned. 9 of the starters returned. I mean, obviously losing Cooper DeJean is a massive blow. I mean, Cooper DeJean was probably one of the more dynamic playmakers in all of college football. I think he's going to be a very good corner or whatever the Eagles end up using him as. Iowa's real weak point right now is at the cornerback 2 spot. I think Jamari Harris has been very, very good for Iowa, has a pick 6. He's usually a surefire tackler in the open field, struggled with that a little bit against Minnesota. But Iowa's given up a lot of explosive passing plays through the air. They've given up 3 60 or more yard passes, and that's just not Iowa. Phil Parker always preaches about limiting explosive plays and kind of just it's like a boa constrictor just slowly suffocating its enemy. Like Iowa doesn't do too much crazy stuff. You know what they're going to do, but they're slowly going to drive you insane. And that's when quarterbacks try to take too many risks, and that's why Iowa thrives on those opportunistic times. They didn't have a lot of turnovers last year, but of course the defense is outstanding. They used to not create a lot of turnovers. This group's been able to create some more turnovers, but again, if I'm Ohio State, I think they're going to try to run the ball effectively, but I really think they're going to target Deshaun Lee if he ends up getting the start again, or TJ Hall. And if Jeremiah Smith is on being guarded by one of those guys, if I'm Will Howard, I am attacking that until Iowa proves that second cornerback can stop it. But on the other side of it, too, if there's one advantage I'll give Iowa over Ohio State, I think Iowa's linebackers are tremendous. I mean, I think it's the top 3 linebacker unit in college football. Jay Higgins, All-American. I still think he's a tad limited athletically, and I mean that respectfully, but he's going to make the tackle in open space. He's going to be able to read the quarterback's eyes, make a play on the football. Has 2 interceptions already this season, forced a fumble, had 171 tackles last year. Sebastian Castro, number 29, is continuing to kind of ascend as one of the top, I think, cash guys in college football. I think he's a surefire NFL pick. And then Nick Jackson, who is on his 6th year of eligibility, played 4 years at Virginia, played last year at Iowa, did not get a 6th year of eligibility until a week before Iowa's bowl game. And if you remember, there was a shooting at Virginia on the football team, so they canceled the final 2 or 3 games of their season. So Nick applied for that waiver, and they gave him another waiver, and he decided to come back. So I think when you look at those 3 guys, I think they're certainly a very, very strong linebacker unit. Xavier Wampa, I think it's kind of make or break time for him because Cohen Entringer is really kind of creeping up that depth chart, and he's pushing for that starting spot. So I think it's a very good Iowa defense, but I've also been a little bit surprised by how much explosive plays they've given up this season through the air. But on the flip side, Iowa is one of only 2 teams in college football that has not given up a rushing touchdown this season.
We had a question from Rick Montoya. How good is Iowa at getting after the quarterback? How many sacks on the season?
Yeah, so I think they're okay. I think they have a couple of guys that can be big-time players. I would not overlook Y.A. Black. Again, he will not pop out to you statistically, but when you watch the film, he creates a lot of opportunity for that defensive line. Aaron Graves had 3 sacks in Iowa's opening game. He's going to be a surefire NFL guy. And then I would look for either Max Llewellyn or Ethan Hurkett off the edges. But the other part of it, too, is I think they've been okay this season, but I think when they've really gotten after the quarterback is when they dial up blitzes. Mm-hmm. And I'll be the first to tell you, I think that would be a very gutsy move to really try to blitz this Ohio State team, just given how dynamic they are through the air. I don't think you really want to give up either safety if they're trying to push them deep. I don't think you want to give up that intermediate ground if they do a check down or maybe some of those medium length passes. I think it'd be a huge risk for Iowa to get very overly aggressive. So that's kind of my big matchup I'm watching too. I believe before last week they were top 20 in the nation in sacks, but I'm not quite sure what they were just because Iowa had their bye week last week. But I would definitely keep my eyes on Max Llewellyn, Ethan Hurkett. Again, he's not a guy that's going to pop out to you when you look at his height, weight, and everything. But I don't know if you remember Joe Evans. He's kind of a very similar mold to a certain degree. Like, you know what you're getting out of him. You're getting max effort. It's a guy who will bull rush you, will be a little bit undersized, but he has potential to make some big plays as well.
One of my favorite guys on Iowa's roster is a guy that grew up not far from where I'm sitting right now in Luke Lachey. I've liked every time we've gotten to talk to him. I like talking to him when he was a recruit. There's obviously the story about Ohio State ending up not offering him. He ends up at Iowa not long after Joe Royer commits. I know his career's kind of been up and down with some injuries, but two-time captain. What can you tell us about Luke and what he's going to bring into this game?
First of all, Jim Lachey has every reason to be so proud of him. Like, Luke is legitimately the nicest human being alive. Like, he has every reason to have an ego, and he just doesn't. I'll give you a quick little story.
Sure.
Thankfully with CBS, we get our one-on-ones during Big Ten Media Days. I know you guys got that too, so I'm grateful for that. I got a chance to interview Luke one-on-one, and it was a little bit of a messy situation as far as scheduling goes, just because of different aspects. But Luke walked in he introduced himself to all 11 people that were in the room, including people that were like restocking like the fridge for, soda and water. That's just who he is. He's the nicest kid in the world, immensely talented. I still think he's getting his legs back under him. Now, if he had been healthy all last season, I'll be honest with you, I don't think he's in an Iowa uniform this year. He had 10 catches for 128 yards, I believe, before his injury. And that was only over about 2 games. I think his highest upside, I think he's one of the best tight ends in college football. I think teams have really focused on taking him away. And I do think that him missing spring, him not really being able to work with the team at full strength, and I think so many other aspects, I think Tim Lester needs to find a way to get Luke Lachey the football. Again, statistically, he is not going to impress you, but on film, I'm telling you, watch him. He is going to be a starter in the NFL one day if he can stay healthy. 6'6", I believe about 245 pounds. I mean, he's a freak athlete. I don't think people give him enough credit for how just crazy athletic he is. Good speed, has become a lot better blocker because I don't know if you remember this during his recruitment process. There was a lot of question marks about how good of a blocker he could end up being, which is a tad ironic to me, just given who his father is. Yeah. I kind of was of the belief that he's going to be able to find a way to block somebody just because the family genes. But yeah, I mean, I'm keeping a very close eye on Luke in this matchup, Patrick. I think they're really going to dial up a couple different things to try to get him involved. But I'm also curious how much effort Ohio State's going to put into defending Iowa's passing game because, again, if you look at Iowa's passing game, let's keep it real. It's not impressive. It's not there right now. I just don't think they have the downfield threat. I don't think Cade McNamara has a lot of arm strength at this point in his career. I think that's really limited Iowa taking some deep shots. But I do think they're going to need to find a way to get Luke Lachey. And if Iowa wants any chance in this game, I've always said your best players have to play their best games. And I think when you look at over the course for Ohio State, when they've lost games, they lose to elite quarterback play. Quarterbacks take over. I mean, even go back to 2017, Iowa, Ohio State.
Yeah.
Nate Stanley had 5 touchdowns in that game. It was elite quarterback play at that point in time. So, again, I think they're going to throw out a couple different things. If there's one quote that stood out to me, and again, this makes me think Luke's going to get more involved as well. I asked Kirk Ferentz about the timing of the passing offense because Tim and some of the players said just a lot of timing issues, which is why Caleb Brown hasn't really seen a lot of time right now because he has not gotten the new timing of this offense. But Kirk responded, among other things, with my question. He said, it's a hell of a week for a test drive. So my ears kind of perk up a little bit, and I'm like, oh, what are you test driving? Is it going to be a Cybertruck, or is this a Lamborghini, or is this a Honda Civic? Like, we're about to find out.
Yeah, that does certainly grab your interest a little bit there when you hear Coach say something like that. Back to Luke, like I was really impressed in kind of how he handled things. There were like 3 or 4 reporters talking to him at Big Ten Media Days from the Ohio State side of things, and obviously, we had kind of an agenda, and he got it, but he's handled it like a pro, talking about how much he loves Iowa City and the home that he has found there and whatnot. And, his dad's standing 20 feet away watching this happen, which also was pretty cool.
He's just got such a unique perspective on things more than anything else. Like, I think his self-awareness is incredibly high. Like, he knows when he's in that setting, he's going to be asked about Ohio State. But I also think it's a benefit to him because he grew up, an Ohio State fan. He's obviously following his dad, going in the radio booth a handful of times. Even when we talked to him this week about going home, he said, I'm excited playing there again. He said, I'm grateful for everything that Ohio State's done for my family. But I also think Iowa at the end of the day has been the best fit for me as far as, I think Iowa undisputedly is tight end you. I don't think there's a big case for anybody else when you compare everything at this point in time. Notre Dame obviously wants to make a push. I don't care about recruiting rankings. I look at, can they get to the NFL? Are they dominant in college football? And are they making waves in the NFL? And if you look at the highest paid tight ends right now, 3 of the top 4, I believe, are Iowa.
Yeah.
And so it's been interesting. And Sam Laporta is going to be getting paid too in a little bit. And Eric All playing for Cincinnati now, which is really, really cool. But no, it's just such a great self-awareness and to understand that, you guys have jobs to do. We have jobs to do. And the fact that he's just not even just willing to accept it and answer questions, he's gracious about it. He will take a bad question, whether it be from me. I've asked bad questions in my day, still do. and make you feel like you're one of the smartest people in the room. And that's a gift that I think he's very, very, just very good at, and as genuine as they come.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be an interesting matchup because Ohio State linebackers haven't faced really a good tight. I mean, I guess Michigan State has one that's still trying to, at least on paper, he hadn't really got going. Did get a big catch last week that ended in a fumble, but covering that tight end, we've seen it before. You mentioned that 2017 game and what can happen there. So that will be a matchup to watch for sure. Another one, Rick Montoya asked, will Iowa be able to shut down Henderson and Judkins? Obviously, these are two of the best rushing teams in the country, at least statistically. How do you feel like Iowa matches up with Ohio State's run game?
I mean, with the credit of Ohio State, I don't know who in the country could stop them. I don't think you can shut them down. I think you can limit them. I think you make things difficult. I think you could even shut down one of them, but you can't shut them both down. Because I was talking to some people earlier this week, and they were asking me, what advantages does Iowa have at this point, maybe over Ohio State? And I said, there's three things that top my head, and maybe the only things I come up with. I said linebacker play. I said defensive coordinator just because it's Phil Parker, and he goes hand in hand. And with the Broyles Award and winning 10 games with that offense last year, like, let's keep it real. And I said special teams. I think traditionally Iowa special teams are among the best in the country. Reese Dakin, freshman punter. Yes, another Australian. Yes, from the same place as Torrey Taylor. Had a really bad punt against Troy, but played a hell of a game against Minnesota. But somebody said, well, what about running back? And I said, I'm giving Ohio State the nod because there's two of them.
Right.
And that's not dismissing, Caleb Johnson, what he's done, because I think he's among the best in the country. Ohio State's got two of them. And on top of that, they're as versatile as any running back in college football. Like after Henderson's breakout freshman year, I think I was right. I was talking to you and Biddle, and I said, this is probably my favorite player to watch. Like, he is so dynamic. If he stays healthy, he is going to absolutely tear up the NFL. I'm incredibly high on TreVeyon Henderson. So I think it's going to be a big focal point for Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, especially, to not allow those guys to get to the second level. I think Chip Kelly is incredibly crafty. I think he's incredibly smart, and I think he's a good play caller. So I'm curious if they're going to break out some different things against this Iowa defense. And I think Chip and Ryan Day said this week, right, that's the best coach defense that they're going to play all season long. Yeah. And that tells me they're going to dial up one or two things. And I think if they go out there, their goal is to punch them in the mouth early. And again, if Iowa gets punched in the mouth early, it's just right now they're not in a system where they can play from behind. So, no, I don't think they can shove them down. Now, could they limit them? I think that's certainly a possibility.
Yeah, Michigan State last week just loaded the box and basically said, beat us another way. And Ohio State did. Neither running back had great days, but they were productive enough. Interestingly enough, 2 rushing touchdowns in that game. One came from Jeremiah Smith. One came from Will Howard. So they found other ways to be successful. All right, last thing for you, David. Just the vibes in Iowa City headed into this game. Obviously, the game's in Columbus. Probably would feel different if the Buckeyes were headed to town. But from being around people, how do you feel like Hawkeye fans feel about this game, as you head into coming off the bye week?
Wait and see. I mean, it's one of those things where I don't think they're going to overanalyze anything that happens in this. And I've kind of said that to people too. Unless Iowa wins, I think it's irresponsible to really overanalyze what goes on in this game. I think a couple things are noteworthy, though. I think it'd be a lot worse had they lost to Minnesota, because for my money's worth, I said the season's over. If they lost to Minnesota, I think a whole lot of people check out. Not in the program. I'm talking from a fan base perspective.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people check out because I've said it's a college football playoff or bust year. I still stand by it. They're on the outside. They need to have a lot of big wins upcoming, and they need to dominate them. And I think Nebraska kind of getting back to where they want to get to. If Wisconsin was ranked, I think they'd feel a little bit better. But this is the prime opportunity. Like, if Iowa somehow finds a way to beat Ohio State, they are right back in the thick of things for the college football playoff. So I think it's a wait and see. I think they want to see them just compete with Ohio State. And again, I'm not saying Kirk or the guys will take a moral victory. They don't believe in moral victories. But after what happened from Iowa's perspective against ranked teams last year, they need to find something to hang their hat on, because I kind of am annoyed with Iowa fans from this standpoint. And I think Iowa fans are annoyed in their own fan base too. I think it's a very split decision on this. Some people are like, oh, you have to play Ohio State. Oh, we have to play Michigan. We have to do this or that. I'm like, you want to play those teams. I guarantee if you go ask the locker room right now, every single Iowa player will say, yeah, we'd love to play Penn State. Yeah, let's play Ohio State. Let's play Michigan. Like, they want to play against the top dogs. New Big Ten, nowhere to hide.
Right.
You got to put up or shut up. You got to go in there. So I think vibes are okay. I think it's like every other week, though, right? Like, as the game gets closer, people are trying to convince themselves that Iowa's going to win. But this is also one of those things where this is why they play the games. This is why it's not won on paper. I mean, I think in that 2017 game, again, totally different scenario. It's at Iowa. It's a night game. Nighttime in Kinnick, I think it's a nightmare for teams to go and play against. They were like a 23-point underdog, too, in that one. Right. But, yeah, so, no, I don't think people are going to be irrational unless Iowa finds a way to win the game.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And as you brought up earlier, the new offensive coordinator, it's going to take some time, all that stuff. So, David, I appreciate you for your time. I hope you enjoyed your Mick Ultra.
It's been delicious. What can I say? I got to go to rehearsal dinner tonight, so I may as well put up a couple more things at HawkeyeInsider.com and be a fun night.
There you go. Mick Ultra, also a big favorite of Steve Hellwagon. So
we end up
with that a lot when we're on the road in the hotel rooms. So I've had plenty of those with him. All right. Again, thanks, David. Have fun tonight. Good luck with everything tomorrow.
Yeah, good seeing you, man.
You too. See you later. All right. Thanks again to David for jumping on. These weeks can get pretty busy towards the end of the week, so I always appreciate our 24/7 sports family helping each other out with some of this stuff. David was also on, if you missed it, with Dave Biddle on CBS Sports HQ. I think it was running on CBS Sports Network as well, as they talked about this game. So I tried to steer the conversation in different ways. And David answered some of my questions for a story behind enemy lines that went up on Bucknuts earlier today. You can read that. We talked about some of the same things, but Caleb Brown, the former Ohio State wide receiver, we talked about why he hasn't played much. He broke down some other things. So if you want to take a look at that, it is on Bucknuts, a free read there if you want to read that and hear more about David's perspective on this game. David also gave his prediction for the game, which I think Buckeye fans will like. I want to talk some things, I think, from the Ohio State side of things for this game, where the Buckeyes have to be aware and where I think, you can take some advantages, having watched some Iowa this week. The first thing I think is going to be really interesting, and we already touched on it a little bit, but what Ohio State's approach is with Caleb Johnson and this Iowa run game. Watching Iowa, it's been Caleb Johnson, they can run anyway, but a lot of off tackle stuff. If you watched the Iowa State game, which I just finished watching that one, so it's fresh in my mind. The CBS broadcast did a good job of pointing out, them running. They joked about calling it the C gap or off tackle, but Iowa hit Iowa State a number of times with those runs, and they've done it in other games as well. Caleb Johnson, the execution of the blocks out there, I think that's something that Ohio State has to be ready for. That's something that these defensive ends have to be ready to get out there and tackle, get off their blocks and tackle, I guess I should say. And you're going to need the linebackers to make tackles. And I think that is going to be the most interesting part of this game, as we come off a game where I know a lot of people were frustrated with the linebackers, and I'm going to get to them in a few minutes. But I think that's going to be key. If you are going to win this game the way I think most Buckeye fans think it should, the odds makers in Vegas, I think Ohio State's an 18.5 point favorite, depending on where you look, which is actually down a little bit from where this spread started, or the line started. I think if you are going to match expectations based on all that, it's going to come down to stopping Iowa's run game. If Iowa can break a few runs, the Hawkeyes are probably going to stay in the game longer than Buckeye fans would like. And it's going to be about tackling. There've been too many missed tackles. Jim Knowles talked about that this week, specifically the linebackers. So you've got to be sure tackled, gang tackling. Caleb Johnson does not go to the ground easy. He is a guy that doesn't look fast when running, at least in my eyes, but gets a lot of ground pretty quickly. I don't know what his numbers are, but I'm watching the game and I'm like, it doesn't look like he's really putting that much effort into it. And he's not like an overly tall guy. I thought the same about a guy like Terrell Pryor, but you could see Terrell Pryor's legs, how far Caleb Johnson just gets the job done. So I think he's going to be key. If he has a big day, Iowa's going to hang around at the very least. And so the Buckeyes have to figure out a way to, we're talking about, can Iowa shut down Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins? Well, can Ohio State at least contain that run game? And I think those off tackle runs are going to be a big part of things that the Buckeyes have to be ready for going into this one. The other thing I've noticed with Iowa, and let me pull up the numbers here. The Hawkeyes are 12th in the country in turnover margin, tied for 12th. Plus 1.25 a game. They've got they're 5th with nope, that's not right. Hold on. I want to make sure I give you the right numbers here. Great radio. They have 5 interceptions this season and 5 interceptions and 3 fumble recoveries. I think this is going to be key, the turnover battle. And Ryan Day talked about it this week. Ohio State has been very good at winning the turnover battle. That's basically what kept things from, being really tight at halftime against Michigan State, those 2 fumbles. Can the Buckeyes keep that up against a team that will be more opportunistic in terms of turning the ball over? They will look to force fumbles. They can intercept the ball. David was talking about top corner for Iowa, already has a pick 6 this year. Higgins, the linebacker, already has an interception this season. So, the on that side of things, can you play a clean game? I think Will Howard's shown the last couple of weeks he can throw the ball to the other team. And this was something that, and I'll talk about Will Howard in a few minutes too, but this is something he did at Kansas State. He turned the ball over sometimes. And you got to cut that down in a game like this for sure. Those mistakes can be punished significantly more. You give Iowa a short field to allow Caleb Johnson to find the end zone. Okay. You'd much rather pin Iowa deep and force them to drive the length of the field against your defense. So those turnovers will be critical. And I think on the flip side, Cade McNamara already this season has 2 interceptions. There is the ability, or there is the possibility, I should say, that he is going to throw the ball to Ohio State wide receivers, Ohio State defensive players. So winning that turnover battle, cutting down on your side, getting them on the other side, it's nothing new, nothing you don't already know. But I think in a game like this in particular, when Iowa may have trouble moving the ball just because their offense and it's still coming together, you cannot let them have a short field. You can't make things easier on an offense that needs things to be easy to succeed. And then David kind of stole the last thing I wanted to say with this Ohio State offense. I think Iowa will do something similar to what Michigan State did, try and shut down the run and hope that their corners can kind of hold up in coverage. I think that will be a mistake. Not that there's a good answer, because I think if you decided to sit back in coverage, then Ohio State will just run the ball on you. But I do think that if you play straight up, so to speak, and don't load the box, trust your guys to make plays. If you're Iowa, I think it gives you a better shot. But and we'll see what Phil Parker does. But I would not surprise me if they focus a little bit more on trying to shut down the run, because I do think that's more attainable, as we saw against Michigan State. So whoever is, and this is what David said, whoever is on Iowa's second cornerback, and they've played a couple guys in that spot. Now, I think it will also be something to pay attention to who Iowa is, where Iowa's number 1 corner is. Is it on Emeka? Is he on Emeka Egbuka? Is he on Jeremiah Smith? Where is Iowa showing the attention? And taking advantage of those mismatches. And Chip Kelly and Ryan Day have been very good at that throughout their careers and this season. This will be a tougher task given just Iowa's defensive schemes in general. And, there will be, if one guy can be shut down in Phil Parker's mind by one corner, then there's going to be coverage help for the other guys, right? So can you find those mismatches? Could it be a game where Carnell Tate, who had a good start against Michigan State and then kind of slowed down, okay, we're going to put our best corner on Emeka, for example. We're going to cloud coverage, shade coverage over to Jeremiah Smith. Okay, Carnell Tate is perfectly capable of beating guys. Brandon Innes, if he gets in the game, things like that. This is why, as good as I think Iowa's defense is, and I don't think this is the best Iowa defense we've seen in the Big Ten, but I do think that there are opportunities for Ohio State because I just don't think, I don't know if there's a defense out there that's going to be able to stop this group. I think this group could stop itself with turnovers and things like that. But I don't think you can just say, we're going to play this guy. There's not a scheme that's going to stop Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate, especially, if Will Howard's out there throwing it because he's made good decisions. So how Iowa chooses to play their defense, I think will be then up to Ohio State to quickly identify and attack wherever the weakness is. And maybe it is they decide we're going to stop these receivers and see if we can just play straight up. Okay, well, now the running backs, the offensive line have to get the push, get through. Those guys will have to make the big plays until Iowa adjusts and makes you stop. But I think those are the three kind of keys. Some of those are pretty routine and nothing game breaking, but I do think that in a game like this against an Iowa team, this Iowa team, you have to do some of the kind of routine things. You can't turn the ball over and all those things I just talked about. Okay, the last thing I want to do before we wrap it up here, and again, if you have some questions, throw them in the chat if you're watching this live. I may have some time at the end to touch on some of those. Always happy to do that. But there have been some things that I've either seen on social media or on our message board or talking to friends of mine who are big Buckeye fans about this team that I think have kind of either gotten out of hand or there's some sort of weird narrative. So I want to start with the linebacker play. The linebacker play hasn't been as good as I think most people expected, but I also think that maybe the expectations were too high. If you listen to me or read my stuff all off season, like that is an area that was a concern of mine. And I don't say that because, I just thought it. People I talked to and things like that. Like, you lost two starters. You lost two really good players. Now I know that Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers didn't have the same statistical seasons last year as they did 2 seasons ago, but these were two guys on two very good defenses. And now you're bringing in a guy in Cody Simon who's been on the roster, right? He's been available, but was not starting over either of those guys. And while Cody Simon has continued to get better, he's not Tommy Eichenberg. He's not Steele Chambers. Now he does do some things that can make up for some of that, or he has gotten better in some areas, but he was behind those two for a reason, despite being in the same class, I think, as both of them or one of them. And there are ways to expose him, especially when you ask him to cover guys. He's had a problem with that in the past. Also, Cody Simon was coming off an injury coming into the season, obviously missed the first game, but didn't participate a ton in the preseason because of that. So I think while Cody Simon is getting his feet wet, there's also still kind of a limitation there. I think he's good enough to be the Buckeye starting middle linebacker, though. I don't think you need to, unless you want to move him to weak side linebacker, a position he's played before. But my point is, he does enough. Plus, he's the leader of this defense, one of the leaders of this team. You've seen it. He's a captain. He's a Blocko guy. So there are reasons he's on the field. And he's made some plays, right? I'm not saying he hasn't. He's also missed on some tackles and things like that. And I think that gets better as the season goes on. And then you had Sonny Styles. And RK, I see your question about the play of Styles. I'm going to address that now. It hasn't been good enough, certainly. he is a player who transitioned from safety, obviously, and is thinking too much about, not making mistakes, not this, that, and the other thing. Trying to decide. I mean, I think you saw it if you go back and watch the Jordan Hancock fumble. I think it was a choice route of Michigan State's tight end, and Sonny Styles is completely flat-footed as the tight end comes at him. And then, it's just, he's not ready to cover the guy in the direction that he goes. And, this is just a guy learning, it's trial by fire. And I know that it's frustrating to watch a guy like that, but I also think it's part of this move from safety to linebacker. And I talked about it a lot in the offseason. This isn't a video game. Moving a guy from one position to another sometimes works seamlessly, but often there is a transition period, and Sonny Styles is still in that transition period. He also does things like recover the fumble and make some tackles. He tied for the team lead in tackles. So, you can see why the coaches want to keep him out there, why they want to, give him time to, make some of these mistakes and learn from these mistakes. Now, you are getting to a point in the season where it's going to be tough to continue to do that if the mistakes are leading to major issues. So far, they haven't. But I think that you had to know that this was coming when you're having a guy change position. It was like last year when he had to go from nickel to replace Lathan Ransom at safety. There were growing pains. Think back to that Michigan game and that Blake Corum run. That's a guy who is trying to remember what to be doing at a position he's not used to playing. Obviously, he had more time. Sonny had more time this offseason to work at being a linebacker, but that's not a position he's really ever played before, as far as I know. So I think these issues aren't surprising, kind of given the circumstances. Now, do you go to backups? And that's the easy thing to say, right? From we're sitting here, we're talking about this, you're talking with your friends, whatever it is. It's like, well, put in Arvell Reese. Okay. Well, Arvell Reese has certainly got some strengths, no doubt about that. He seems to be a guy that just goes and gets the ball. But there are obviously reasons why Arvell Reese is not starting, not playing over these two. I'm not at practice every day, but you have to trust that the coaches aren't just not playing Arvell Reese for some reason. Now, I do think you'll see Arvell Reese a lot more this weekend. We saw him actually a good amount against Michigan State because they played three linebackers quite a bit. But this is also a guy who, yes, he's played linebacker before in high school, but last year he was essentially playing as a rush guy, defensive end type player. And so he's still kind of learning that linebacker position. And Jim Knowles wants to keep him at middle linebacker. Could it get to a point this season where you put him in at middle linebacker and Cody Simon at weak side linebacker? That's a possibility. I do think, though, that they believe in Sonny. And will they die on that? Will Jim Knowles and James Laurinaitis die on that ship? We'll see. You certainly want to see signs of progress, especially this week when he'll have chances to make plays. Bobby McCormick said, I know he's talking about Gabe Powers, has been playing against the twos most of the time, but he has looked really good. Do you think they up his playing time? I don't. I think this is a guy that is probably in line for a bigger role next season. I think it would take a decent amount of other things to happen to have Gabe Powers in there. If you're asking me why, I don't know, but just kind of my understanding is these, the kind of top three, and you can throw CJ Hicks because he's still playing, top four are kind of the guys. Again, it's tough without being at practice. You're kind of relying on things you hear and what you see, like you said, when he's playing against the twos. But it does not seem that they are ready to put Gabe Powers in a meaningful situation unless their hand is forced. Could that change? Down the road, possibly, but I would be surprised if it's anytime soon. And then last thing on linebacker, Sean Anders said, Shazier was like that as an underclassman. Styles is going to be a beast in the middle, just like his daddy. I think that's what Buckeye fans hope, right? So another thing that I think has kind of gone around that I wanted to discuss, maybe dispel, people really, really didn't like Davison Igbinosun last week against Michigan State, and he didn't play a great game. but I also don't think he played as bad as, maybe people thought watching the game or thought in person. I know his PFF grades were thrown around a bit. Look, Davison Igbinosun is what he is at this point in his college career. He is not a lockdown cover corner. He is a physical, hit you in the mouth, talk trash corner. And there's nothing wrong with that. But as a defense, as Jim Knowles, as Tim Walton, you have to scheme because of that. And early, if you go back to early last season, they were playing press coverage with Davison Igbinosun, and it was getting penalties. He's just too handsy. And so what they've done is he more often plays an off coverage. And the idea is that, you may give up 3 or 4 yards, but he's going to come down and lay a hit on the guy. And, that'll stop the play there because he's a pretty good tackler. And maybe he thinks twice about it next time, or that's in the back of his head when he goes to make a catch because he does hit that way and he can get into guys' heads. So you're not often going to see Davison Igbinosun in press coverage because they found that it results in penalties, and you'd rather give up 3 or 4 yards and have him come make a play than give up, 10 to 5, 10, 15, whatever it is, depending on the call. It's just simple math there. The touchdown play that Michigan State scored on last week, Denzel Burke was in press coverage. The receivers were stacked. I think Davison Igbinosun was probably too far off. I'm not sure. It's tough to kind of judge what he was expecting there because it was just a quick screen pass, and then he kind of hesitated, and I think that's probably why he didn't get to the receiver quicker. Weird play for sure. They could have reacted better on that. I think ultimately it probably doesn't matter because whether it was that play, if that play goes for 7 or 8 yards or whatever off the screen, and now you have a couple plays to run it in. I think Ohio State, the problem there was you turned the ball over with the interception and then had a good run back. So I don't think Davison Igbinosun had a great game last week. I don't think he is, going to be a lockdown corner, but there are NFL projections with him as a late first, early second round pick. So clearly there are people out there that think he is doing a good job. I think for the most part, he's been good. I've talked to some people who are like, well, why can't you get Jermaine Matthews, who based on everything we've seen is a good cover corner in there more often? That's a good question. I just think they like what Davison Igbinosun gives on the field. And again, sometimes, and this is similar with Cody Simon, sometimes it's not always about the, pass breakups or tackles or anything. Like Cody Simon's an emotional leader for this team. Him being out there has to do with some of that as well, in addition to what he can do as a, linebacker. Davison Igbinosun, again, like he wears it all on his sleeve. And that's something that this defense thrives on, right? So not that Jermaine Matthews couldn't do some of that, but they know what they're getting from Davison Igbinosun. And I think for the most part in his year plus playing in this defense, he's been pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. The final thing, I saw a lot of talk about Will Howard and this downhill throwing stuff. And I talked about it a little bit last week. Like, I just don't know how often Ohio State is going to try it. Cheers, by the way. I've talked a lot and not had much beer. I saw there was a question from Billy Tuesday. Well, more of a statement. Wonder if Chip will be calling more downfield shots. I think the thing with Will Howard is that's not what he's best at doing. He can make throws. There was a throw I think it was last week against Michigan State, to Emeka Egbuka on the sideline that, just like looped throw that fit in there perfectly, got the Buckeyes 10 to 15 yards. There was another one, I want to say early in the second half after a penalty, like the Buckeyes got like 20 yards on 1st and 15 or 2nd and 15. He's throwing from one hash to the other sideline, gets the ball there to Emeka. It looks pretty simple, but it's not not an easy throw to put on target and have enough on it. Those are what Will Howard's good at. He can use his legs. He generally makes good decisions, but people keep asking for this downfield stuff. And at some point he's going to have to do it. No doubt about it. You're going to have to make a play. Do I think they could mix it in a little bit more? Yeah, probably. And maybe they just haven't because they haven't needed to. You did see they've tried to Jeremiah Smith a couple times. One hit, one obviously was the first interception for Will Howard. My biggest thing with Will Howard is, can he, just avoid these interceptions? It's only been 2 this year, and I don't think either of them is that problematic. But for his Kansas State career, he played 34 games. I think he started 28. He threw 25 interceptions. Just last year, before coming to Columbus, he threw 10. So it wasn't like these all came early in his career. Now, he did throw 10 as a freshman in 2020 as well. But that was one of my concerns with Will Howard, especially in this Ohio State offense. They don't want guys that turn the ball over. And Ryan Day typically has not had quarterbacks that do that. So Will Howard's got 2. I think if you look back at the quarterbacks recently, like right around 6 has been the number that they've thrown in a season. So Will Howard's already, pushing on that. It hasn't even played his toughest defenses. So for me, that's the thing with Will Howard. Can he avoid the turnovers and add with his legs and then just get the ball out to the weapons the way he's done? You will have to take some shots at points. This was a big talking point last year with Penn State and Drew Aller, right? Why aren't they taking shots? Can he take shots? Things like that. You've seen Will Howard do it. It's not great. That's not his strongest attribute. He's admitted that it's something that he's worked on. And so maybe it's gotten better, but I don't think you just continue to try deep shots just to do it, right? Especially in a game like Saturday where you don't want to have what you had against Marshall, where, you essentially punt the ball. Maybe if it's 3rd and long and you're going to give it a shot and, if they intercept it at the 1 or 2 yard line, that's fine. But I just don't think you need to do it just to do it. Again, there will be times where it makes sense to take shots downfield, but it doesn't have to be something you force when your quarterback isn't the best at it. And frankly, there aren't a lot of quarterbacks in college football that are great at it. I mean, look around. A lot of times when teams complete deep shots, it's either, receiver makes a great catch or bad coverage. I look at that Alabama-Georgia game that everyone loved, and it was a fun game to rewatch. Obviously, I watched it after the fact because I was covering the Ohio State game, but the coverage on some of those passes was just awful. And I was really impressed with Jalen Milroe on some of the throws he made, but the throw at the end to Ryan Williams, the cornerback doesn't have any idea where the ball is, doesn't even make a play on the receiver. So you get credit for a 75-yard touchdown pass that probably went 30 yards in the air, but there was no coverage there to deny it. I mean, most college quarterbacks could make that throw. So I think Carson Beck is a good deep ball thrower, but there aren't a ton in college football. It's just not something that a lot of college football quarterbacks are good at. And I think that's part of the reason Will Howard came back, is to work on some of that stuff. So maybe we will see it. But I don't know if it makes sense for Ohio State to force that and risk some things. Now, maybe you try it against a Northwestern or something. And, there may be an opportunity this weekend, because there are plays that, okay, the primary target isn't the deep shot. That's actually what happened with the Jeremiah Smith play where he was intercepted and Will Howard was intercepted. That was not the first read. It was taken away. He had Jeremiah Smith one-on-one, ends up throwing the interception for a number of different reasons. But I think there will be opportunities to throw it if it's there. And I think Will Howard has to make the right decision. Against Oregon, you're probably going to have to take a shot or two at some point in that game. But Ohio State's also been able to get big plays off of not throwing deep, right? Some of those screen passes that they've started to hit. Jeremiah Smith has shown more than capable of taking a slant pass to the house. We haven't even seen Carnell Tate or Brandon Inniss really unleashed in that part of the game. So they haven't needed to do it. I don't know when it will be, and I don't know how often it will be. But I'm not going to, if I'm calling plays, if I'm Chip Kelly, I'm not going to force Will Howard to do something that he's not 100% comfortable with. Maybe not his best trait, just to say that, oh, look, Will Howard can throw the deep ball. It just doesn't make sense to me, at least. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you to David Eickholt from the Hawkeye Insider, our 24/7 Sports Iowa site. If you want to read kind of the other perspective of things, you can head up over there. David and his crew do great work. So if you want that. Also, as I mentioned, David answered some questions for me in a written form that is on the site and a little bit different than what we talked about. You can check that out over on Bucknuts already today. Thank you guys. If you whether you watch this live, tune in after the fact. Appreciate it. If you would like and subscribe, you can also subscribe to Bucknuts on any of your streaming channels. That would be great. We appreciate it. And we'll be back next week when I think there will be a lot of interest about what's going on with the Buckeyes. That show, I haven't figured out timing yet. It may come earlier in the week because I'm traveling out to Eugene on Thursday, but maybe we'll do it from Eugene if time allows. We'll see. Stay tuned, as they say. Anyway, thanks, Buckeye fans. Cheers.